Hi guys, this is Dr. Ahmet Ergin. Today I'm going to talk to you about intermittent fasting. So we are going to go deep dive into this today, and you are going to know a lot about intermittent fasting, and you're going to be very well prepared for intermittent fasting if you're diabetic or not. So if you like this video or our other videos, please subscribe so you can get all the videos, turn the notification on, give a thumbs up, and let's go. Now, what is intermittent fasting? Now, we have to discuss about this, but before we dive into that, I am going to tell you exactly what today's topics are so you can stay on track. Now, number one is we're going to talk about what it is and what it is not. And we're going to talk about what happens in your body when you fast intermittently. And we are going to go, why should you do this? It's extremely important for you to understand. If you're doing it without thinking or without understanding what's going on, you will not be able to stick with it. Now, how to deal with side effects such as irritability or mood problems when you're fasting. And we're going to talk about workouts, right? We always tell exercise, exercise. Can you really exercise when you're hungry and weak? We're going to talk about that as well. And then we are going to talk about how should diabetics do intermittent fasting? So what happens if you're on insulin? What happens if you're on some other oral agents? Isn't your blood sugar going to crash? We're going to talk about this in detail as well. So if you're diabetic, make sure you watch until the end of the video. And then we are going to talk about, of course, who should not do intermittent fasting. Now let's jump on to the first topic. So what is intermittent fasting? Now basically you are fasting a long time. So you can call fasting 6 hours, you can say 8 hours, you can say 12 hours. So when you go for a blood work, you fast typically 8 to 12 hours, but that's not necessarily what we are talking about here. We are talking about 16 to 20 hours of fasting a day. Now, that sounds very intimidating, but actually it's not that difficult, and I'll explain to you why. So what it is not is, it is not fasting for 2 to 3 days. So that's going to really make you weak. And you can actually get the benefits from fasting just by fasting 16 hours, and that includes drinking, not just dry fasting, 16 hours of fasting. And you can make your own rules. You can fast 16 hours at any time during the 24 hours, depending on your schedule, depending on your eating habits. But you're giving yourself 8 hours of eating period. And some people do 20 hours of fasting, and they do 4 hours of eating period. So whatever works for you. So if you cannot control your eating, so there's another point. So you cannot just do binge eating after 16 hours of fasting. So we have to still control our calories. So we have to make sure that we are restricting our calories significantly during the days of intermittent fasting. Now, there are different rules around this. Some people do 5-2, which is 2 days of fasting out of 7 days in a week, and some people do 3 days of fasting and 4 days of regular eating. So, what's the difference between cutting the calories or counting calories to 1,200 calories or 1,500 calories, like very limited calorie diets, versus the intermittent fasting? There is actually a major difference. Now, studies show that actually if you are fasting 16 hours a day or more, up to 20 hours, 2 to 3 times a week, your insulin resistance will dramatically improve, and you may actually go into diabetes remission. Now, studies show that people who reduce their calories but just eating, every 3 to 4 hours or whatever, but they're eating very little calories, they lose weight, but their insulin resistance and remission from diabetes does not necessarily happen in all cases. So it has been proven that eating pretty much nothing, just drinking non-caloric beverages during that 16 hours of period, or 16 to 20 hours a day, if you can do that twice or 3 times a week, you are going to have major benefit. Again, I'm not asking you to fast entire week. If you just do that two days out of 7 days and pick your days, you can pick your days you're not super busy, you're not super very active, where you're just chilling and relaxing. But make sure that on those days, put yourself a goal and say that I'm not going to eat anything for 16 to 20 hours, and you're going to see a dramatic improvement in your insulin resistance. It's gonna be, you're gonna be so surprised. And on the other days, you can still continue to eat. Now, what is more interesting, studies also show that even if you don't lose weight at all, so you don't lose weight at all, you do fasting for 2 days out of a week or 3 days of a week, and you don't lose at all because maybe you're eating, 1,800 or 2,000 calories during that 8-hour period, even then, your insulin resistance will improve. Even then, you're going to lose belly fat. So, if you, and then major thing about intermittent fasting as well, the muscle loss is very minimal compared to reducing your calories overall. If you are actually doing that twice a week, 16 to 20 hours of fasting, you are going to keep your muscles and you're going to lose belly fat. For guys, that means it is six-pack, guys, so that is doable. And for diabetics, that means that you are not going to have to take many medications, or you will not have to take insulin anymore. And again, this is not a starvation for a long time. You're just doing that twice a week, 16 to 20 hours, and I think that's a good bargain for a diabetic, because I'm not necessarily asking to cut everything and fast every day. Just do that for twice a week and you will see the difference. Now, what happens when you fast? Of course, your body is burning the glucose first 8 to 12 hours, and then you start burning the fatty acids. Now, your muscles are full of triglycerides. So if you're eating, for example, on a regular day, that glucose goes to your muscles. And if this glucose is not used by your muscles, if you're not physically very active, then that's going to turn into triglycerides, which is a form of fat. Now, the triglycerides are being used in a fasting state. So once you deplete the glucose stores, the glycogen and glucose stores in your muscles, then your body starts using the triglycerides that turns into fatty acids, and the fatty acids turns into ketone bodies. So, and then you start burning ketones. The ketones are not necessarily just a breakdown of fatty acids, but the ketone bodies have a lot of major functions in the body. What are they? So ketone bodies are basically, it's like your, how should I put that? It's like your, like housekeeper. Let's put it that way. So basically what they do, when the ketones are around, they're like police officers. They go and they stimulate certain proteins and molecules in the body to repair the damage. So think about this. You are working 8 hours a day, and you're resting, what, 16 hours, right? So if you work 16 hours a day every day, what would happen? You would burn out. So the reason you're only working 8 hours a day and the rest of the time you're resting, because your body has to recover from the stress of the work, from the tiredness, from all this, the muscle activity or brain activity. You need a break from work. Exactly the same, your body needs a break from eating, because every time you eat, you're introducing potentially toxic chemicals. They create what we call oxidative stress. The oxidative stress has to be cleared. Now, also, your body cells has to regenerate. We call that autophagy, which means that your cells are dying or killing itself so that the new ones come in and replace the old ones, and so that your body can continue to function. Now, ketone bodies are helping for this system to be regulated. Also, what the ketone bodies are doing, they are creating molecules and such as adiponectin, and they reduce TNF-alpha. Like, they make good hormones in your body, and they reduce the bad cytokines and so forth, and it creates a stress response. So it's like getting ready for a hurricane in Florida. You're taking time from work, you're putting your shutters on, so you make sure sure that you're protected. So that's what ketone bodies are doing. It's creating a stress response. So as a result, the inflammation goes down in the body, and you are ready for the further attack that can come from the environment. So as a result, we know that the ketones help, for example, epilepsy patients. Ketones help even patients with rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory arthritis or inflammatory diseases. Again, you need to understand diabetes and insulin resistance is an inflammatory state. So for example, when you're overweight, the adiponectin levels go down and your inflammation levels go up. Your fat cells are creating a lot of inflammation when they are too full. So if you're not using these ketone bodies, the inflammation levels in your body go up. The moment you go into fasting, then suddenly the ketone bodies are repairing the inflammation, and when the inflammation goes down, what happens is your insulin resistance improves, and the endothelial function, which is the endothelial cells are the cells that are on your blood vessels, your arteries, also is repaired. What does that mean? That means that the cardiovascular disease will also go down. So you need to let your body rest and recover from the oxidative stress, from the damage from the environmental factors. That's what your ketone bodies are doing. But if you're constantly eating and not letting this ketogenesis happen so that the repair can happen, then you're constantly under attack. So as a result, patients who are constantly eating, not giving a break, not fasting for a prolonged amount of time, they end up being insulin resistant, they end up being obese or overweight, and they are the same patients that are way more likely to have cancer, they're more likely to have inflammatory disorders. So that is the key. That's what happens in your body when you fast. So since you understood this, let's move on to the next one. Okay guys, so when you fast for 16 hours, you are going to be irritable. You are going to feel weak. You are going to have a little bit of a mental fog. But the thing is, I have good news for you. That is gonna go away. Like, first of all, think like this. When you start exercising, you start going out to the workouts and to the gym, and the next thing you feel like, oh my God, I'm dying. I'm like, my energy is drained, you feel like you need to sleep all the time. But then if you keep going, that energy will come, your body will adapt. So your body is so used to having so much food, having so much plenty of calories all the time, and the moment you strive your body, it's not any different than an alcoholic going through an alcohol withdrawal, or it's not any different than a smoker stopping smoking. Of course you're not going to feel good because your body, no matter what you give, the diabetics are the same way. When I bring patients blood sugar from 400 down to 100, they say, what did you do to me? And I tell them that, okay, well, you need to make sure that you go through this process, and it's not easy, but once you go through it, you're going to be a new person. When you quit alcohol, smoking, you're a new person. When you quit too much processed sugars, you're a new person. Once you start fasting and your body turns into something totally different, you start getting energy. Now this typically happens around 2 to 4 weeks. So you have to be patient for the side effects to go away. Now in the meantime, you're going to be irritable. You're not going to be too nice maybe, but you have to understand and you have to control yourself that it's your body, you're going through this. You don't have to put other people with the same stress that you're going through. So you can also explain to people around you. You can say, hey, look, I'm fasting. I'm sorry, I apologize if I'm being mean or if I'm being irritable, but it's going to go away. Just bear with me. You know, same thing happens. You know, I do fasting during Ramadan like another billion people do. And then we all get irritable. So we all do. But then after a week, I feel like I can fast the rest of my life because then you get used to it. So it's not really that hard. I mean, if you don't know, our fasting around a month, and we don't even drink water. So actually, if I was drinking water and coffee, I would have done much better. So these are tricks that you need to make sure that you're occupied. So on those Ramadan days, what I do is I see a lot of patients. I'm like busy. I'm gonna make sure that I'm going through the day, because if I sit down and think about food, that's not gonna be good for me. It's not gonna be good for anybody. So you need to make sure that you guys are, either you're not doing dry fast like during Ramadan. So you're going to be doing regular fast with water. You can drink coffee. You can drink non-alcoholic beverages. Just make sure that you don't drink too much coffee, because that can actually add to the irritability. Or you can drink some teas that actually can help with calming your mood down. It can be chamomile or whatever you prefer. But the major problems are going to be headaches. It's going to be tiredness. But once you go through that, after a couple times of fasting, say 2 to 4 weeks, it's going to be a breeze. So just put up with it for a while. So can you work out while fasting? I think you can. It's just you have to be careful, especially when you first start your fasting. You want to take it easy. So you can definitely do that, but what I would suggest is, start slow, make sure you stay hydrated, and listen to your body. You can do a milder cardio workouts, but definitely it's going to help you a lot, because you're already burning fat, and if you are doing some sort of cardio exercise, definitely that's going to be very useful. Now, in terms of lifting, that may not be the best time to lift, because your muscles are totally depleted of glycogen, and typically with resistance exercise, you are using the glycogen or glucose in your muscles, so your performance is going to be very limited. So what I would suggest is do your lifting in the fat state, maybe 2 hours after eating, when your muscles have glycogen again. But I would not recommend lifting type of exercise during the fasting. Diabetics. Now, what do you do? How do you do intermittent fasting when you have diabetes? That's an important part. So guys, you have to really, if you're going to do intermittent fasting, make sure you talk to your endocrinologist. I cannot really tell you exactly what to do in your personal case, but I can tell you this. If you are on mealtime, short-acting, or fast-acting insulin, you have to be very, very careful. Okay, that's number one rule. Because you don't want to take a short-acting or a fast-acting insulin when you're not eating. That's going to mean that's going to go give you a severe hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. If you're on a long-acting insulin, you have to be also very careful, because your insulin resistance will go down dramatically. So you have to really monitor your blood sugars very closely, and on those days that you're not going to have anything for 16 to 18 hours or 20 hours, you have to really reduce the basal insulin. This could be 𝐁𝐥, Levemir, Tresiba, Lantus, whatever you're on, Basaglar, there are a bunch of them. So you really need to make sure that your blood sugars are staying stable. Now, totally stopping the basal insulin is not a good idea, because patients with diabetes, due to insulin resistance, they need some insulin at baseline so that their liver is not making too much sugar. So you have to have some sort of basal insulin. Now, type 1 diabetics, again, they can do that too, but they have to be, again, very careful with basal insulin. A lot of people don't understand the role of the basal insulin. Role of the basal insulin, again, those 𝐂𝐁 or Tresiba type of insulins, is to keep your blood sugar stable. Now, if your blood sugar is going down or dragging down while you're fasting, that means that you're on too much basal insulin. That's a good way of understanding how much basal insulin you should be taking. If you go to bed with 150 blood sugar and you're waking up with 70, you're on way too much basal insulin, because that basal insulin is dragging you down overnight. So you need to learn to stay stable with any basal insulin. Now, as your insulin resistance improves, then you're going to need less and less basal insulin. And maybe you will not even need basal insulin. That's the whole point of doing intermittent fasting. But if you are careful enough, you're monitoring your blood sugar, if you have a Dexcom or Freestyle Libre or Guardian, whatever, one of those continuous glucose monitors, that's going to help you a lot, because they're going to alert you and so forth. That way, you can stay on top of your blood sugars. preferably reduce your basal insulin at least 20% on those days. And if you're on too much basal insulin, unfortunately, you're going to go low. So you have to be extremely careful. If you're going low, make sure you cut back on your insulin. Every time your blood sugar is going low on basal insulin, you guys have to cut back 10 to 20% at least. Okay, so that is the very important rule. If you're on glipizide, glyburide, glimepiride, stuff like, we call them sulfonylureas, you cannot take a sulfonylurea and go fast, because the time you take glipizide or glimepiride, your insulin is going from here to here. So it is designed for people who eat. If you're not going to eat, do not take your sulfonylurea, your glipizide or glimepiride. Now, on the other hand, sometimes if you don't take it at all, your blood sugar may steadily go up a little bit. That means that you may want to manage your diabetes with an insulin sensitizer or with a basal insulin, because basal insulin absorption once you do the injection is more predictable than a sulfonylurea, like a pill, like a glipizide or glimepiride. Those are the medications that we really don't know how much insulin you're going to make at that point. So they are more risky for patients who are doing intermittent fasting. Now, if you're not on sulfonylurea, if you're not on basal insulin, then you're okay. So as long as you're on a GLP-1 such as Ozempic, Trulicity, Victoza, Rybelsus, anything like that, they don't really drop your blood sugar. So you can still take those medications to regulate your blood sugars if your blood sugars are going up without taking them. And then some of them are weekly. Like, for example, if you're on Ozempic and you take that once a week, since you take it once a week, it's in your system for a week, so you cannot really take it back off. But the good thing is, unless you're on another insulin or sulfonylurea, your blood sugars on Ozempic only is not going to drop. So metformin is another medication that does not necessarily drop your blood sugars. It can, but it's very rare. The GLP-1 class, as we discussed, are good. SGLT2 class also is fairly safe to use during intermittent fasting, but there's no point of actually taking the pill, because what they do, they make you urinate the extra blood sugar. So unless your blood sugar is already running constantly high, if you can bring your blood sugar down to a reasonable level, you don't necessarily have to take those Jardiance or Farxiga or Invokana in the morning, because you're not going to be eating, your blood sugar is not going to spike. So unless you're running 150 to 200 even when you're fasting, then take it. But it should not necessarily bring your blood sugars down. So SGLT2 class, which is Jardiance, Farxiga, Invokana, Steglatro, these medications are fairly safe to use during intermittent fasting. If you're on pioglitazone, that is safe to be on during intermittent fasting. And these are the major things that people use for diabetes. But the major things you have to remember is the insulin and sulfonylurea are the two classes that can crush your blood sugars when you're intermittent fasting. So make sure you consult with an endocrinologist to adjust your medications if you're going to go to this approach. And I do that all the time in my patients, but we monitor them, we make sure that we stay on top of them, and they're perfectly safe. But when you're doing it yourself, there's a good chance of error there as well. So who should not really fast? Well, if you're pregnant, don't do it. If you, as I said, if you're on multiple daily injections, type 1 diabetics, you can do it, but you have to be extremely careful. If you're taking medications that needs to be taken with food, for example, can prevent you doing intermittent fasting. If you have high uric acid, that can also trigger some attacks occasionally. But for most people, intermittent fasting is very safe, and I hope that video was helpful. If so, make sure that you give a thumbs up and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.